Okay, thanks, Nigel. Okay, I'm going to talk to just very briefly, you'll be glad to know, from the aspect of the Nautical Archaeological Society. I'm the regional coordinator for Wales. And some of the discussions that we've already had, the NAS can train and advise and help people get a better appreciation of the maritime heritage of wherever they are. As a good example of that is the U-boat project, particularly the South Wales Field School, where we had some funding and we were able to engage the best part of 100 NAS members with a project where they could get involved with a wreck site. And we did that for 10 days. That was quite unusual, but having trained or helped people, the question always comes up is, what can we do now? And engaging with the general public is something which the NAS would like to see more of, because the general public and divers in particular can make a volunteer contribution to the maritime record, and particularly the Welsh maritime record. So what I thought I would do is I'd just quickly give an example of a project that we ran during COVID when we couldn't really get out and do a lot of practical work. So this was a project we ran through 2020-21. It was an online volunteer research project. And just to give you a quick overview of what we did here, hopefully it'll give you a feel of how volunteers can be used to hopefully contribute towards the project that Deanna's been working on. So the background behind this project, the WWW stands for the Welsh Wreck Web Research Project. The background to this is that back in the early noughties, a couple of divers were working out on the Llanbadrig Reef in the North Cardigan Bay area of northwest Wales. I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you who are listening in on this or where that is. Here's a chart of that area. And those of you who understand charts can clearly see there the Llanbadrig Reef, which runs the best part of 15 miles out to sea. A lot of it dries at low springs, so it's a deadly reef there. And the divers uncovered a wreck about 2-3 miles out off the shore. And there's a lot of wrecks in and around this bay in particular. And the reason for that is predominantly, if you look at the little map on the right there, you'll see, I'm sure you know where Liverpool is, but through the predominant part of the 19th century, when ships were under sail and wooden, they would sail through round up the Irish Sea into Liverpool. And sailing in on the prevailing southwesterlies, of course, a lot of them would get caught in this hook of land and be wrecked on the coast there. So the wreck that these divers had uncovered was thought to possibly be the Diamond. It was a merchant ship wrecked and lost in 1825. And in 2002, Cadw designated this site under the Protection of Wrecks Act, and that made it only the 6th protected wreck around the Welsh coast and the first designated under the then recently established devolved National Assembly of Wales. So following designation of this particular site, under my guise with the Morven Archaeological Diving Unit, we were asked by Cadw to carry out some further investigation of the site to confirm or otherwise if this vessel was the Diamond or not. And I couldn't resist, as I knew Nigel was going to be here today, showing you a picture of Nigel on his way to work on this particular site with us. We worked on this site on and off for 8 dive seasons. Investigating the site, what we could find underwater, and trying to compare it with the historical data that relating to the Diamond, which was already out there. And after 8 years, our conclusions were that the wreck on this particular site is, spoiler alert, not the Diamond. So we had achieved, after 8 years, our objective and proved that it wasn't the Diamond. But of course, this wasn't the end of the matter. As having answered Cadw's question, it obviously left us with 2 further questions. If it wasn't the Diamond that we've been diving on for 8 years, what the hell was it? And where the hell is the Diamond? Anyway, as our attempt to answer the first of these questions, it was what other vessels have been lost in the area, so that we could try and identify what we've been diving on. And our research initially centered on a map from shipwrecks in North Wales, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen from Iverwood Jones. And you can see the number of vessels that have gone down in and around that area. it is quite extensive. And just so you don't have to count them, there are actually 174 wrecks on that particular chart. So what we did was we set about looking at all these wrecks and any more we could find. And our research was predominantly carried out by Sue Barker, who was one of our team members. And she didn't just come up with 174 wrecks, as Ivor Wynne-Jones has shown, but 453. And these dated from 1590 through to almost the present day. All of which were known to have either wrecked or been involved in serious maritime incidents in the area. So we all know what happened coming forward to 2020. COVID struck and there was people all over the world being forced into lockdown. Consequently, one of the downsides of this was for the NAS was that we couldn't then get out and do a lot of diving and working on intertidal sites or things like that. So it came to a bit of an abrupt halt on the practical activities we could do. So NASA put out a plea to what can we do to try and maintain enthusiasm and engagement with maritime archaeology. So we dug out our old database of top end of Cardigan Bay there and looked at those vessels, most of which had never been investigated any great depth. And from this, the project evolved. So the project was initially intended for anyone with an interest in carrying out some voluntary online research from the safety of their home, investigating any of these vessels on this database. And the database you can see there was the initial, what it looked like, and each line is a single vessel. So there's not a lot of information on that, those half a dozen pages. So people were invited to email us and register their interest in this. And there was a lot of people were interested because they got nothing better to do while they were being locked down. So we sent a digital copy of this database for them to have a look through and select any vessels that they fancied investigating. And of course, it was a complete variety of vessels, from everything from not logboats, but wooden ships, sailing ships, right through to iron ships and submarines and anything. So having registered their interest and some vessels that they fancied having a go at researching, we added their name against the vessels on the database. We sent them some guidelines, some guidance notes on how to tackle research online, and a sample report template to help them guide them through how to disseminate the information they turn up. So once the research was complete, they could then submit their reports, and we've now added all of those to the project page on our website. And as a sideline, any NAS members who engaged with this, who submitted a report, also gained some credits within the NAS membership towards future qualifications. So throughout the project, we publicized the whole event through the NAS site, through their weekly discoveries emails. And we used all these sort of nice intertidal pictures of wreck sites in Wales to try and attract people's attention to the Welsh project. And the inquiry is starting to roll in. We intended initially just to run this through, to the end of 2020. At the time, at the beginning of the pandemic, no one had any idea how long it would last. And we thought 9 months would be more than enough. But the enthusiasm was still there 9 months down the line. So we ran it for a full year. And by the end of 12 months, 102 people had actually registered their interest in the project. And as people started to get more involved and take on vessels to investigate, of the 102 inquiries, 75 of them actually came through and took on some vessels to investigate and research. So we had about a 74% uptake, which was pretty good. Over the course of the 12 months project, we came across a lot more vessels, predictably. So it took the original database up to 585, which was a 29% increase. By the end of the project, 326 of those had been taken up to research, and subsequent to the end of the research project, 2 or 3 people, in fact a few more, have asked if they can continue looking at them, and we've obviously got no reason why we shouldn't say yes to that. And 366 have been taken up as at today, which is 63% of all the vessels on our database. At the end of the project, in April 21. 216 had been reports had been submitted, and at today's date, I had 2 more in over the weekend. 272 have come in. So that gap that you can possibly see here, my mouse will work on that, you can see is gradually starting to close. So hopefully, eventually, we will have closed that gap completely. At the moment, we've got almost 3/4 of all the vessels that were taken up to be researched have been not only researched, but actually had reports submitted. So not too shabby. So that's what the initial database looked like. As at today, it looks like this. The blue are all the reports that have been submitted to date. The yellow ones are still being researched, and the white ones have yet to be taken up. So for the researchers at the beginning of this project, there was no restrictions or no conditions, no specific qualification required to take part. So consequently, the people who joined the team had a wide range of experience, ages, knowledge, ability, and they came from really quite diverse backgrounds. There were students and professors, but what we hadn't fully appreciated is that the commencement of the project was that it would attract people from many other parts of the world. If you'd asked me at the beginning, where was this going to go, I would have expected maybe a handful of people, predominantly probably from Wales, who got a vague interest in maritime archaeology, might have been interested in doing some research. As it was, people contacted us from many parts of the world, from far and wide, and every morning my inbox would be full of emails from all sorts of people asking me all sorts of questions. So by accident, the project had been, this little project in a small part of Welsh waters had become quite a bit of an international project. So the research for some vessels, inevitably, there was very limited information available online. And for some people, it was the first time, in fact, for a lot of the people, it was the first time they carried out any research, let alone compiled a report. For some, English wasn't their first language. And I know from a couple of people, it wasn't even their second language. So people also had to deal with lots of other things, with COVID being very prevalent. They may have been made redundant, they're working from home, schooling their children, they may be furloughed, or worse, they could have been even catching the virus and being hospitalized, coping with long COVID, stress, dealing with bereavement and so on. It goes on. So for some people, they only had a very minimal amount of spare time to devote for the project. But because it was a voluntary exercise with no financial commitment, there was no money involved with this project at all. We had no funding for it, and no one took any money out of it. There's no money to spare. But there was no time constraints. So people could dip in and out of it as the project suited them and their times. So the guidance notes that I mentioned were there. We set up to try and help people who are unfamiliar with carrying out research, particularly online. So it included notes on possible websites to help them get started, along with tips and other hopefully advice. And throughout the duration of the project, once a month, I'd circulate to everybody who expressed the slightest interest in the project some updates on stats, so how the project was going, any new websites that have come to light that people have found useful, any assistance and interest that we could offer. And but mainly there to sort of help people through COVID, because that was the whole initial purpose of the project, and remind them that they might be in isolation, working from home alone, but actually they were just part of a virtual project and they were not completely on their own. So for the reporting side, most reports submitted have revealed were involved with a single vessel. Some of them, where there might have been a collision, were duplicated with a couple of vessels, but most were for a single vessel. And some of the reports are really so detailed, several over 100 pages, there was one even over 200 pages. The averages come in at about 32 pages, and they have absolutely included a lot of detail from the full backstory from birth to death of the vessel. They've detailed, builders, owners, masters, crew, every voyage taken that they could find, cargoes, all the repairs. And because most of these were wooden sailing vessels from the 19th century, there were a lot of encounters and incidents on their way. And all that was carried out. They included maps and charts and pictures. And we also suggested by using a table we call at a glance table, that the reports could include this one single page that details the whole specification of their life story, so that people that don't want to read a 100-page report on a single vessel can just at a glance look at this chart. And this is the sort of thing we produced. The red marks are what they could fill in, and the rest of it in black here is what we could suggest. So you can just glance at this and get an overview, a complete at a glance picture, a synopsis of the vessel's life story. So you can see this front cover of the report. We'd put together a template, both to save people having to develop their own, so that people weren't put off writing the report or engaging with the project. And it also helped create a degree of standardization for the project. And you can see from the front cover here, all they needed to do was fill in the red, the vessel's name, a picture if they could find one, and their own name. So the template included all the conventions that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, the writing reports and how to go about doing it. So basically all they needed to do was to replace their sections in red with a few words of their own, paste and copy something relevant, or write things if they felt they could do that. So as the report started to be submitted, this is the sort of thing that they look like. So they all had this like nice similarity, most of them did anyway. So it was really quite successful. And to date, we've got 272 of these reports so far. All the reports are available on the website in a PDF form. This is what the website page looks like. This is early days. It's a bit more filled in since I took these screen captures. So you've got a picture of the area, whereabouts the vessels are with their names, and then attached to it is this is just the probably look down the side here. These are the names of the vessels. This is just the A's and B's. So if you actually look at and click on any of the names, you don't just get the one line on this chart, on this database, but you get the whole PDF access to it. And some of the vessels you can probably see have got, like the Alice Banning here, it was in collision with the Borrowdale, and the Borrowdale's down here, and so on. So it's worked very well, and it's quite an extensive table now. There's a lot more than shown in this slide. So in May last year, in conjunction with one of the researchers, a doctor from Bulgaria, who'd undertaken a couple of the wrecks to research, we provided a joint conference paper at the DEGRA conference last year. It was very convenient, titled Safety in the Waterways, the conference. So it dropped straight into what we'd been doing with this project, although our project, as you can see, didn't involve a lot of safety in lots of areas. And the synopsis of our paper can be found in the DEGRA's journal for that particular conference. So the project was conceived mainly as a volunteer exercise to help people through lockdown. The spin-off was that it would hopefully help them in the future carry out research and disseminate their findings, while also adding to particularly the Welsh Maritime Historic Record. Unforeseen was how well it would take off and how international it would become. So thanks must go to everybody who engaged with this project and for helping turn it into such an international success. So thanks to all these guys who contributed their research to reports, and special thanks must go to the UK Hydrographic Office, who very kindly supplied us with a free copyright license to that chart, to the NAS for use of their access to the British newspaper archive, for publicity to the CBA and the Royal Commission, and to a couple of the researchers, Robert and Chris, who had already done a lot of research in their own prior to this project, who willingly gave up information to all the other researchers, and for Sue Barker, who put the original project together, certainly the database. So thanks for listening, and we hope that this volunteer project gives you some precedent to contribute towards what is trying to be conceived here for the Maritime Archaeological Research Framework for Wales. And we hope that volunteers from the general public and from sport divers in the future can be engaged with this project.